Chapter 1. Kalakaua Twilight. The dinner rush at the lanai is a controlled hurricane. It's a symphony of clattering ceramic, the sizzle of garlic and ginger hitting a hot wok, and the tidal murmur of 100 different conversations in 5 different languages. From my post behind the bar, a long slab of polished koa wood that's seen more spilled mai tais than I've seen paychecks, I have a god's eye view of our little universe. And it is, in its own chaotic way, perfect. Ryan is gliding through the main floor, a tray balanced effortlessly on one hand. He's working a 6-top of sunburned tourists from Ohio, and he has them eating out of his palm. He laughs, a bright, genuine sound that cuts through the din, and the woman with the bad hibiscus print shirt blushes like a teenager. He's not just a server. He's a vacation experience. He has a way of making people feel seen, of making this overpriced meal the anchor of their entire trip to paradise. He catches my eye from across the room and gives a subtle roll of his eyes, a secret shared only between us. I grin and go back to muddling mint for another mojito, the rhythm familiar and comforting. Michael, I need 2 lava flows. Stat! Table 12 is getting thirsty and cranky. Kelly breezes past the service station, her ponytail swinging. She isn't walking, she's orchestrating. She bumps my hip with hers in a gesture so familiar it's like a second language. She winks. And Ramsey's crying at the host stand because a party of 10 just showed up with no reservation. Tell him to offer them free edamame and lie about the wait time, I say, not looking up from my shaker. Already did, she calls back. Already gone. A whirlwind of efficiency and nervous energy that keeps this whole place from imploding on a nightly basis. This is our life. A 3-person machine. Kelly is the engine, Ryan is the brilliant, shining chassis, and I'm the axle, the quiet part in the middle that connects it all and bears the weight. We work together. We live together. We raise their 1-year-old son, Kai, together. On paper, I'm the roommate, the best friend, the honorary uncle. But the reality is so much deeper than that. A thing so woven into the fabric of our days that it doesn't need a name. I am part of the family. Later, after the last tourist has been sent out into the humid Waikiki night, and the kitchen staff are mopping the floors to the sounds of Hawaiian music on a crackly radio, we walk home. The air has cooled, and the scent of salt water and exhaust hangs over Kalakaua Avenue. Ryan carries a sleeping Kai in a baby carrier strapped to his chest, the baby's tiny head tucked under his chin. Kelly walks between us, her head resting on Ryan's shoulder. I'm carrying the diaper bag in a plastic container with leftover Kahlua pig. We are a strange, lopsided constellation moving through the neon-washed streets. Our apartment is a 3rd-floor walk-up 5 blocks from the beach, a place where the rent is too high and the walls are too thin. But it's home. The salt air has corroded the window screens and the linoleum is peeling in the kitchen, but it's our sanctuary. Kelly takes Kai from a reluctant Ryan and disappears into the nursery, her voice a low, sweet hum as she sings him to sleep. Ryan and I collapse onto the lumpy couch, the springs groaning in protest. He smells like restaurant grease and the coconut suntan lotion from the tourists. The guy at table 4, Ryan says to the ceiling, asked me if we have volcanoes in our backyards. What did you tell him? I told him mine erupted last Tuesday, but the Homeowners Association is being a real dick about the lava flow. I let out a laugh that's more of an exhale, feeling the tension of the long shift drain out of me. Kelly emerges from the nursery and flops down on top of both of us, squeezing herself into the small space between our bodies. She rests her head on my chest and drapes her legs over Ryan's. We fit. The 3 of us. A human jigsaw puzzle. You guys are my favorite, she mumbles into my t-shirt, her voice thick with sleep. Ryan's hand finds hers, his fingers lacing through hers on my stomach. I watch their joined hands rise and fall with my breath. In this moment, there is no jealousy. There is no longing for something more. Because what more could there be? I am pinned to the couch by the 2 people who make up my entire world. The air is still. The city outside is quiet for a moment, and I think if I could just stop time and live inside this single, perfect second, I would. I would stay here forever. Chapter 2. Sunset Beach in the Mainland. Our day off means escape. It means loading up Ryan's beat-up Toyota Tacoma with surfboards, a cooler of Primo beer, and enough supplies for a baby to survive a small apocalypse. It means fleeing the concrete and chaos of town for the Church of the North Shore. The drive itself is a kind of therapy. Once you pass Wahiawa and the landscape opens up, the air changes. The city haze gives way to the sweet smell of wet earth and sugarcane. The buildings replaced by endless green fields that roll toward the jagged emerald mountains. Ryan has a scratched CD of the Strokes' Is This It playing. The raw guitar riffs a perfect soundtrack to our exodus. We have our spot at Sunset Beach, a patch of sand protected by a small grove of ironwood trees. Kelly sets up base camp, laying out a blanket and an umbrella to create a shady oasis for her and Kai. She looks like the perfect island mom, all tan skin and easy smiles. "Don't get eaten," she calls out as Ryan and I grab our boards. "Only by the waves," Ryan yells back, already jogging toward the water. The ocean is where Ryan and I make the most sense. There's no need for the careful dance of conversation, no room for the complexities of the life we lead on shore. There are only the waves, the salt, the sun, and the instinctual, unspoken language we share. He points to a darkening line on the horizon, and I know exactly where to paddle. I see him shift his weight on his board, and I know he's about to go for it. We surf for hours, a silent, joyful communion. In the water, he's not a husband or a father, and I'm not the roommate. We are just two bodies, two friends, moving in rhythm with the Pacific. When we finally paddle in, exhausted and happy, a familiar figure is sitting on the edge of the blanket, talking to Kelly, Jameson. "Look what the tide washed in," Ryan says, clapping him on the back. Jameson grins. He's in board shorts and a faded tee, looking a decade younger and 100 times more relaxed than he does in his military uniform. He comes down from Schofield Barracks almost every weekend, a satellite in our solar system. "Figured I'd find you guys here," he says, but his eyes find mine. They always do. "How's the water, Mike?" "Perfect," I say, shaking the water from my hair. "You should have come in." "Maybe next time," he says, and his gaze lingers a moment too long. Jameson is a good guy, steady and quiet, a welcome dose of mainland calm in our often frenetic lives. There's a kindness in him that feels safe, but it's a frequency I can't quite tune into. Not when all the music of my life comes from the two people sitting next to me. We stay until the sun begins its spectacular dive into the ocean, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. The day is perfect, a memory we're already nostalgic for while we're still living it. We're packing up the truck, sandy and sticky, the cool evening air raising goosebumps on our skin, when Kelly turns around, her phone pressed to her ear. She has a strange, excited look on her face. "Oh my God, Mom, really?" she says into the phone. She listens for a moment, her eyes wide. "No, that's amazing. Yes. Okay, let me talk to Ryan. I'll call you back." She disconnects the call, her face flushed. "You guys are not going to believe this." Ryan stops trying to wedge his surfboard into the truck bed. "What?" "That was my mom," Kelly says, practically vibrating with energy. "My cousin Jenny is getting married, back in Oregon, and my mom said if I want to come for the whole month leading up to it, she'll pay for my ticket and for Kai's. A whole month. A real vacation." She says the last words like a prayer. A silence hangs in the air, broken only by the sound of the waves. "A month." The words echo in the space between us. "A whole month." Ryan is the first to speak, plastering a wide, bright smile on his face. "A month? Wow, babe, that's incredible. You totally deserve it." It's a flawless performance, but I've been studying him for years. I see the tiny flicker in his eyes, the slight tightening around his mouth. "A whole month to myself, to be with my family," Kelly continues, lost in the dream of it, not noticing the shift. "And Stevenson will be there. He's the best man. It'll be so fun." The name hangs in the air. Stevenson. The best man from their own wedding, Ryan's old friend. It means nothing. It means everything. "That's great, Kel," I hear myself say, my own voice sounding distant. A sudden, inexplicable coldness seeps into my bones, a deep dread that makes no sense. The perfect sky seems to darken. The idyllic day is suddenly over, a closed chapter. On the drive home, no one talks. Ryan puts the CD back in, but the raw energy of the music now just feels like noise. I look in the rearview mirror and catch Ryan's reflection. He's not looking at Kelly or at the road. He's staring out the window at the darkening island, his face a perfect, unreadable mask. And in that moment, the solid ground I have stood on for years turns to sand. Chapter 3, The Longest Week. The drive home from the North Shore was a silent one. The Strokes CD stayed in its case. The windows were down, but the balmy night air, which usually felt like a comforting blanket, now felt heavy and suffocating. Kelly, oblivious, hummed to herself, making a mental packing list. Ryan drove with a rigid focus, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I watched the familiar landmarks pass by: the Dole Plantation, the Wahiawa Botanical Gardens, the turnoff for Pearl Harbor, and felt like a tourist in my own life. Everything was the same, but a filter had been thrown over it, draining the color and warmth. That feeling bled into the week that followed. Our apartment, once a haven of easy, chaotic harmony, became a museum of unspoken tensions. The three of us moved around each other with a strange new formality. Kelly was the only one who seemed immune to it, a whirlwind of activity. Suitcases exploded in their bedroom, tiny baby clothes were folded into neat piles, and lists of instructions were taped to the refrigerator. Her energy was a frantic, cheerful buzz that only served to highlight the profound stillness between Ryan and me. We avoided being alone together. If Kelly went into the nursery, I'd suddenly find a reason to do dishes in the kitchen. If I was on the lanai, Ryan would stay inside. We were two magnets flipped to repel, pushing each other away with a force equal to the one that usually pulled us together. The easy physical contact, a hand on a shoulder, a casual lean on the couch, vanished completely. We were polite. It was excruciating. "It's going to be so weird without them," Ryan said one evening. We were on the lanai, the city lights of Honolulu a glittering carpet below. Kelly was on the phone with her mother, her voice a faint murmur through the screen door. It was the first time in days he'd acknowledged the impending quiet. "Yeah, a month is a long time," I replied, studying the rim of my beer bottle. "You'll have to keep me from burning the place down," he said with a short, forced laugh. It was a test, an invitation to fall back into our old banter, but I couldn't find the words. "I'll try," I said. The conversation died there, leaving us in the thick, humming silence. My own guilt was a constant companion. A good friend, a true part of the family, would be nothing but thrilled for Kelly. He would be excited for her to get a well-deserved break, to see her family. And a part of me was. But it was a small part, drowned out by a selfish, gnawing dread. And beneath that dread was something worse, something I barely dared to acknowledge, a spark of forbidden anticipation. The thought of the apartment, of our life, with just Ryan and me, filled me with a feeling so complex, a cocktail of terror and excitement, that the guilt redoubled, leaving me sour and withdrawn. The night before their flight, Kelly insisted on a Last Supper. We ordered a giant pizza from Big Kahuna's and sat on the floor, the greasy box between us. Kai, sensing the strange energy, was fussy, crawling from one lap to another. "Okay," Kelly said, wiping her hands. "The philodendron gets watered on Tuesdays. The rent is due on the 1st, the check is already on the fridge. Please, for the love of God, don't let the surfboards take over the entire living room. And call me. Every couple of days, okay?" She looked at both of us, her eyes earnest. "We will," Ryan promised, his voice steady. For her, he could still be the rock. He could still be the perfect husband. The next morning at Honolulu International, the air was thick with the scent of jet fuel and lees. The terminal was a river of human goodbyes. We stood at the security gate, a final, awkward trinity. Kelly hugged Ryan, a long, tight embrace. Then she turned to me. "Take care of him for me, Mike." She whispered in my ear, her voice tight with emotion. "Always," I promised, my own throat closing up. I took Kai from her arms, holding him for a moment. He smelled like baby powder and the sweet Hawaiian air. He looked at me with Ryan's eyes, and my heart ached. I handed him back to Kelly, and that was it. They turned, waved one last time, and walked down the jet bridge. We watched until their shapes were swallowed by the tunnel. Then they were gone. Ryan and I stood there for a long moment, side by side, two statues in the sterile, echoing airport. The announcement for a flight to Tokyo crackled over the intercom. The month had begun. And as we turned to walk away, the space between us felt vast and terrifying, a blank map waiting to be filled. Chapter 4, The Shape of the Silence. The silence in the Tacoma on the drive back from the airport was a different kind. It wasn't the tense, brittle silence of the last week. It was a deep, resonant quiet, heavy with unspoken possibility. All the things we hadn't been saying now had room to breathe. When we walked back into the apartment, The quiet hit us like a physical force. No baby monitor crackling. No toys scattered on the floor. Kai's empty crib, visible through the open door of the nursery, was a monument to the life that had just left. "Well," Ryan said, dropping his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door, "it's just us." The first few days were an exercise in cautious navigation. We fell into a new rhythm, a bachelor pad parody of our old life. We worked our shifts at the restaurant, our movements still perfectly in sync behind the bar and on the floor. But at home, we were two strangers learning a new dance. We surfed more, staying out at Diamond Head until our muscles screamed and our skin was tight with salt, as if we could exhaust the tension out of our bodies. We ate cereal for dinner and left our wet towels on the floor. It was a hollow kind of freedom. The shift happened on a Thursday. It was our day off, and it had been raining since dawn, a steady, gray downpour that trapped us inside. By noon, we'd cleaned the apartment, done the laundry, and were now sitting on the couch, surrounded by a silence so profound it felt louder than the rain outside. "I can't do this," Ryan said abruptly, standing up. "I need a drink." He came back from the kitchen with a bottle of cheap tequila and 2 shot glasses, and for the rest of the afternoon, we drank. The liquor worked like a key, unlocking the words we'd kept hidden. We talked about everything and nothing. We talked about growing up, his sun-bleached childhood in California, my gray, landlocked one in Ohio. We talked about the first time we saw real big-wave surfers at Waimea and how it scared the hell out of us. We talked about our dreams from before the restaurant, before Kelly, before our lives became this tangled, beautiful, complicated thing. He was halfway through a story about his brother Tyler when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up. "Kelly." My stomach lurched. "Hey," I answered, trying to sound sober. "Hi. How are you guys? Are you surviving?" Her voice was tinny and distant, a voice from another world. I could hear her family laughing in the background. "We're good. House is still standing. How's Kai?" We talked for a few minutes, the conversation stilted and full of empty spaces. I told her we missed her. I didn't tell her that the person I was missing most was the version of Ryan who sat next to me before she left. When I hung up, Ryan was looking at me, his expression unreadable. "She good?" he asked. "Yeah, she's good," I said, placing the phone face down. It felt like an artifact from a buried civilization. The rain finally stopped as evening fell, leaving the air clean and cool. We migrated to the lanai. The bottle of tequila, now half empty, came with us. He put on music, not on the Discman, but on the small stereo in the living room, turning the speakers to face the door. It was Jeff Buckley again. It was always Buckley. He sat in the chair next to me, closer than he had all week. Our knees were almost touching. I could feel the heat coming off his skin. My entire awareness narrowed to that single inch of empty air between us. "Remember the first time Ramsey brought you to the restaurant?" he asked, his voice low and a little slurred. It was the same question he'd asked a week ago, but this time it felt different. This time it wasn't a memory. It was a destination. "I remember you were an ass to me," I said, my voice softer than I intended. He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that finally reached his eyes. "I was. I saw you walk in, and I thought, there he is." "There who is?" I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. His eyes held mine. The faint, tragic chords of the guitar filled the space between us. He didn't have to answer. I knew. I had always known. He leaned forward, closing that final inch of air, and his lips met mine. It was soft and hesitant at first, tasting of tequila and salt and years of unspoken words. It wasn't a drunken mistake. It was an arrival. It was the period at the end of a sentence I'd been writing in my head for half my life. I leaned into him, my hand coming up to cup the back of his neck, and the kiss deepened, becoming something sure, something certain. It was everything I had been terrified of, and everything I had ever wanted. The song played on, but I couldn't hear it anymore. All I could hear was the frantic, joyful, terrified beating of my own heart. Chapter 5. The World Remade. I woke to the pale gray light of dawn filtering through the cheap blinds of Ryan's bedroom. For a disoriented second, I didn't know where I was. My head was thick from the tequila, and the room smelled like him, like salt, sweat, and something uniquely his own. Then the memory of the night before rushed back in, a tidal wave of rain-soaked confessions and the feeling of his lips on mine. I turned my head, and he was there, awake, watching me. 1,000 anxieties scrambled in my brain. Would he regret it? Would it be weird? Would he pull away and pretend it was just the booze? But he didn't say a word. He just smiled, a slow, sleepy smile that held no trace of doubt. He reached out and brushed the hair off my forehead, a gesture so simple, so tender, it saved every fear in my head. In that single, quiet moment, the world was remade. Getting ready for our shift at the lanai was a familiar routine made entirely new. We moved around each other in the small bathroom, sharing the sink, bumping hips. He put toothpaste on my toothbrush. I stole a sip of his coffee. When he leaned in to kiss me before we left the apartment, it felt less like a new, daring act and more like something we had been doing our entire lives. The apartment no longer felt empty. It felt full to bursting, occupied by the vibrant, living energy of our secret. Work was our first test. I expected it to be a minefield of potential missteps, but our years of practiced synchronicity served us well. To anyone else, we were just Mike and Ryan, running the bar and the floor like a well-oiled machine. But now our performance had a secret soundtrack. A quick glance across the crowded restaurant held a novel's worth of meaning. When he came to the service station to grab a drink order and his fingers brushed mine, a jolt went through me that was entirely our own. Our bond had always been the engine of this place. Now it was a hidden fire, warming me from the inside out. "You guys seem to be surviving without the boss," Ramsey said, leaning against the bar during a lull. He looked back and forth between us, a smirk on his face. "Maybe even thriving. You're both glowing." Ryan just laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. "It's called not having to do baby laundry. It's a miracle drug." I felt a blush creep up my neck, but I busied myself polishing a glass. Ramsey bought the excuse, but he was right. I was glowing. I felt weightless, like I was floating a few inches off the ground. Every color seemed brighter, every flavor more intense. The drudgery of the job, the annoying tourists, the endless demand for pineapple-laden cocktails, none of it could touch me. I was encased in the beautiful, fragile bubble of what Ryan and I had become. The guilt I had anticipated never arrived. There was only joy, a pure, crystalline happiness that I was terrified of breaking. This, I thought as I watched Ryan charm another table, this is how it was always supposed to be. That night, we didn't bother with the couch. We tumbled straight into his bed, exhausted from the shift, our clothes still smelling of seared fish and garlic. We didn't talk. We just held each other, our tired bodies fitting together like two halves of a whole. His arm was a heavy, comforting weight across my chest, his breath warm against my neck. For the first time in my life, I felt no anxiety about the future, no longing for something I couldn't have. I had it. He was here. Everything was perfect. Chapter 6. A call from another life. Our days fell into a rhythm that was both new and ancient. We woke with the sun, our limbs tangled together. We'd grab our boards and go surfing in the early morning light at Ala Moana Bowls, the waves small and clean, the water all ours. We worked our shifts in a state of quiet collusion. We came home and the apartment was our sanctuary, our island within the island. Our intimacy wasn't just the feverish passion of those first nights. It was in the slow, easy way we moved around each other, in the lazy Sunday mornings spent reading the paper in bed, in the way he'd start telling a story and I'd finish it. My life, which had always felt like a supporting role in the Ryan and Kelly show, was now a two-man play, and I knew every line. The outside world still existed, but we kept it at arm's length. One afternoon, Jameson stopped by the apartment unannounced. Ryan and I were on the couch, watching a movie. My legs draped over his. We untangled ourselves a second before I opened the door, a sudden, panicked maneuver that felt both silly and necessary. "Hey! Just in the neighborhood," Jameson said, though his gaze darted between the two of us, sensing the interrupted intimacy. He was holding a six-pack of beer, an offering. "Figured you guys might be bored." "Never," Ryan said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. "Come on in, man." We made small talk for an hour. Jameson was steady and kind as always, but I could feel his observant eyes on us. He saw the way I looked at Ryan when he wasn't paying attention. I saw the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes when he looked back at me. He was a good friend, but his presence was a reminder of the world outside our bubble, and I was relieved when he finally left. The real intrusion came on a Tuesday night. We were making dinner, chopping vegetables side by side while a Jack Johnson CD played softly. The phone rang, and the caller ID flashed Kelly. It was Ryan's turn to answer. "Hey, babe," he said, his voice instantly shifting into a different gear, the bright, cheerful tone he used only for her. I kept chopping onions, my head down, listening. His side of the conversation was a series of energetic affirmations. "That's awesome. Oh, he'll love that. No, everything's great here. Just hanging out." "Yeah, Mike's right here." He was smiling into the phone, but it was his customer service smile, the one that didn't touch his eyes. I watched as he leaned against the counter, his free hand gripping the edge of the granite, his knuckles turning white. "Stevenson sounds like a character," Ryan laughed, but it was a brittle, hollow sound. "Yeah, okay, you too. Love you. Bye." He put the phone down and the silence rushed back in, heavier than before. The easy warmth in the room was gone. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice cautious. "Yeah, man. Perfect." He turned his back to me and started washing his hands at the sink, his movements stiff. "She's having a great time. The wedding planning is in full swing. Stevenson is apparently the life of the party." He said the name like it was a foul taste in his mouth. "That's good," I said quietly. "That she's happy." "Yeah, it's great," he said, still not looking at me. He dried his hands and walked out of the kitchen onto the lanai, leaving me alone with the half-chopped vegetables. The wall between his two lives had just been thrown into sharp relief. The phone call was a dispatch from a world he had temporarily abandoned, and it had shaken him. I followed him out onto the lanai and wrapped my arms around him from behind, resting my chin on his shoulder. He was rigid for a moment, then he relaxed into my hold, leaning his weight back against me. "Don't worry about it," he murmured, turning his head to kiss my temple. "It's all good. I'm right here." I chose to believe him. I pushed down the tiny, cold knot of fear in my stomach and held him tighter. Later that night, our physical closeness was fierce, urgent, as if we could use our bodies to build the walls of our Eden thicker, to push the outside world away. But as I fell asleep, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that the walls were paper thin, and a month was no longer a long time. It was a countdown. Chapter 7. Borrowed Time. The last week passed in a sun-drenched, melancholic haze. The raw, electric joy of our first days together had been replaced by a quiet, desperate urgency. We were living on borrowed time, and we both knew it. I found myself trying to memorize everything, to burn the details of these days into my mind, as if preparing for a long winter. The exact shade of blue in Ryan's eyes when he laughed, the way his hair curled behind his ears when it was wet with seawater, the feeling of his hand in mine as we walked along the shore at night, hidden by the darkness. These moments felt precious and fleeting, like grains of sand slipping through my fingers. Our conversations grew shorter, filled with the things we couldn't bring ourselves to say. The future was a forbidden topic, a sheer cliff edge we both avoided. "It's going to be weird having the apartment full again," I said one afternoon. We were waxing our boards on the lanai, the scent of coconut filling the air. It was the closest I'd come to acknowledging the impending end. Ryan didn't look up from his task, his movements precise. "It'll be good to have Kai back," he said, his voice even. He didn't mention Kelly. The omission was as loud as a shout. My anxiety, once a quiet hum, was now a constant companion. What was this? What were we? Was it just a temporary thing, a bubble of fantasy that was about to pop, leaving nothing behind? Or was it the beginning of something real, something that could somehow survive the collision that was coming? I wanted to ask, to demand an answer, a promise. But one look at the tension in Ryan's shoulders, the carefully constructed calm on his face, and I knew he didn't have the answers. Or maybe he did, and I was afraid to hear them. So I stayed quiet, choosing to live in the dwindling moments of our fragile paradise. The night before her flight home was the worst. We lay in his bed, the familiar comfort of his room, now feeling like a stage set about to be struck. The windows were open, and the sounds of Waikiki, a distant siren, the rumble of a tour bus, the faint beat of music from a nightclub, drifted in. For hours, we didn't speak. The silence between us stretched thin and tight, heavy with everything we were leaving unsaid. I listened to the rhythm of his breathing, trying to sink mine to it. I wanted to reach out, to hold on to him, but I felt paralyzed by the impending dawn. As I finally drifted into a restless sleep, a single, desperate thought looped in my mind, a prayer to a God I didn't believe in. Please, don't let this end. Chapter 8. The Bombshell. Morning arrived like a death sentence. We woke before the alarm, the dread so thick in the room it felt hard to breathe. The first thing we did was strip the bed. I carried my pillow and a few stray t-shirts back to my own room, the short walk down the hall feeling like a mile-long retreat. My room was cool and unfamiliar, smelling of dust and disuse. Making my own bed felt like a fundamental betrayal. With a frantic, wordless energy, we scrubbed the apartment, erasing every trace of the life we had built over the past month. We were two criminals cleaning a crime scene, only the crime was our own happiness. The drive to the airport was a replay of the first one, but in reverse. The silence wasn't full of possibility anymore. It was a vacuum, heavy with loss. We stood at the baggage claim, watching the faces come through the sliding doors, every one of them a stranger, every one of them a painful delay of the inevitable. And then I saw her. She looked different. Her tan was darker, her hair lighter. She was wearing a new dress, something bright and floral that I'd never seen before. She radiated a new kind of confidence, a mainland glow that made her seem like a visitor. She was holding Kai, who looked bigger, older. He saw Ryan and his face lit up. The reunion was a mess of awkward angles and stiff embraces. Ryan hugged her, a quick, rigid gesture. He took Kai from her, holding him tight, burying his face in the boy's hair in a way that looked more like seeking refuge than giving welcome. Kelly hugged me, a breezy, one-arm squeeze. "I missed you guys so much," she said, her voice bright. It didn't feel like a homecoming. It felt like an invasion. In the truck, she filled the silence with a non-stop, bubbly monologue. She talked about her mom, her cousin's wedding, the dress, the food, the drama with the bridesmaids. Ryan drove, his eyes fixed on the H1 freeway, his knuckles white on the wheel. "And you guys, you are going to love Stevenson," she chirped, turning around in her seat to look at me. "He is just the funniest, most fun person. We had the best time. He taught Kai how to say dude." She laughed, a happy tinkling sound. Ryan didn't react, but I saw a muscle jump in his jaw. We got back to the apartment, and the space immediately felt smaller, crowded. Kelly was a whirlwind, dropping bags, opening windows, reclaiming her territory. "God, it feels so good to be home," she sighed. But it didn't feel like my home anymore. She put a sleeping Kai in his crib and then came into the living room, gathering us with a gesture. She stood before us, beaming, her face flushed with excitement, like she was about to announce we'd won the lottery. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath. "So I have the most amazing news. The best idea I have ever had. It just all sort of happened, and it makes so much sense." I looked at Ryan. He was a statue, his face a perfect blank mask. "So, things with us have been weird," she said, gesturing between herself and Ryan. "And being away gave me so much clarity. And Stevenson, he gets it. He gets me. We just connected so much." She paused, her smile unwavering. "We slept together." She delivered the line not as a shameful confession, but as a triumphant statement of fact. My brain short-circuited. I couldn't form a thought. Before either of us could even process the words, she rushed on. The second, more powerful wave of the tsunami right behind the first. "And the best part is, he fell in love with Hawaii when he visited for our wedding, and this trip just sealed the deal for him. He's tired of Oregon." She clapped her hands together. "He's moving here. He's going to be here in a few weeks. I told him he could crash with us for a bit while he gets on his feet." She looked at our stunned faces, her expression one of pure, undiluted joy, completely oblivious to the devastation she was unleashing. "Isn't it perfect?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. "I was thinking about it the whole flight home. We don't have to break up. We can all be together. The four of us. One big, happy family." The word family hung in the air, a poisoned dart. I looked at Ryan. The mask had cracked. His face was a canvas of pale, controlled horror. He looked like an animal caught in a trap, the steel jaws closing around his leg. My own world, the beautiful, secret world I had shared with him in this very room, didn't just end. It was obliterated. In its place was a nightmare, and we were all standing in the middle of it. Part 1, The Golden Haze, chapters 1 to 8. The story up to this point has established the idyllic life of Michael, Ryan, and Kelly, Kelly's departure, the secret, blossoming affair between Michael and Ryan, and concludes with Chapter 8, where Kelly returns and announces that her lover, Stevenson, is moving in with them to form one big, happy family. Part 2, The Undertow. Chapter 9, The Fracture. The word family echoed in the sudden ringing silence of the room. It was the most menacing sound I had ever heard. Kelly stood beaming, waiting for applause, for celebratory hugs, for us to embrace her insane, beautiful, catastrophic vision. My own lungs had seized up. I couldn't seem to draw a full breath. I risked a glance at Ryan. His face had gone beyond pale. It was a waxy, bloodless white, and his eyes, fixed on some point just past Kelly's shoulder, were flat and dead. The only sign of life was a tiny muscle twitching violently in his jaw. He didn't yell, he didn't scream. The control in his stillness was more terrifying than any outburst. He took one slow, deliberate step backward, away from her, away from me. "I need some air," he said. His voice was a low rasp, utterly devoid of emotion. And then he turned and walked out the door, closing it softly behind him. The click of the latch was like a gunshot. Kelly stared at the closed door, her perfect smile finally faltering. A look of genuine confusion clouded her face. "What's his problem?" she asked, turning to me, her hands on her hips. "Did I not explain it right? Doesn't he see how perfect this is? No one has to lie. No one has to choose. We can just be." I stood there, pinned by her earnest, uncomprehending gaze. Every cell in my body screamed in solidarity with Ryan, wanting to lash out, to tell her she was a reckless fool who had just detonated our lives. But I couldn't. Defending Ryan's reaction would mean explaining why he was so devastated, and that was a secret I was still desperately clinging to. So I did nothing. I stood there, paralyzed and mute, a coward. "I think he's just surprised, Kel," I finally managed to stammer out. The lie felt like ash in my mouth. "It's a lot to take in." "It's brilliant, is what it is," she said, her confidence returning. "He'll see. He just needs a minute to catch up." She sighed, then scooped up a pile of Kai's new toys and headed for the nursery, her faith in her own vision unshaken. Ryan didn't come back for hours. I put together Kai's new portable crib, my hands shaking. I listened to Kelly give the baby a bath, her cheerful splashing and singing a surreal counterpoint to the howling void in my chest. I retreated to my room and lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a ghost in my own home. He returned long after midnight. I heard his key in the lock, the heavy stumble of his footsteps. He reeked of whiskey. He didn't say a word, didn't even look in my direction as he moved like a shadow through the living room. He went into what was once their room and closed the door with a definitive click. A minute later, I heard the faint sound of Kai starting to cry from the nursery. Then Kelly's tired, frustrated sigh. Then her soft footsteps as she went to soothe her son. I lay in the darkness of my own room, a stranger separated by a few feet of drywall. The family was back together, and we were utterly, irrevocably broken. Chapter 10. A Seductive Numbness. 2 weeks later, Stevenson arrived. He was exactly as advertised, tall, blandly handsome, with an easy, careless charm and a duffel bag full of Surf brand t-shirts. He was crashing on our couch, his presence shrinking our already small apartment, his obliviousness a constant, grating irritant. Our home had become a Cold War masquerading as a sitcom. Kelly played the role of the bubbly cruise director, desperately trying to force fun, suggesting group dinners and trips to the beach that never quite materialized. I was the silent, anxious peacekeeper, trying to exist in the spaces between the tension. And Ryan was a ghost. He worked, came home, drank, and disappeared into his room. The only words we exchanged were logistical. Do you need the truck tomorrow? Is the rent paid? The warm, intimate world we had built a month ago felt like a fever dream. The breaking point came on a Friday night. The air in the apartment was thick with unspoken resentment. Kelly had tried to initiate a family game night, and the attempt had crashed and burned, ending in a simmering, silent standoff. Ryan was nursing a beer, his eyes dark and stormy. Kelly was on the verge of tears. I was mentally calculating how quickly I could claim exhaustion and escape to my room. Stevenson, in his profound lack of awareness, decided to play therapist. "Whoa, heavy vibes in here," he said with a lazy grin. "You guys need to chill. Seriously." He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a small prescription bottle. "Try one of these. My doc in Oregon gives them to me for a slip disc, but they're basically a vacation in a pill. He shook two small white pills into his palm. OxyContin. It'll smooth out all the edges, he promised. Ryan looked from the pills in Stevenson's hand to the strained, unhappy face of his wife. He looked at me, his expression hollow. He looked like a man who would do anything to escape. Without a word, he walked over, took one of the pills from Stevenson's palm, and washed it down with the last of his beer. We watched him. For about 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then a slow, miraculous change began. The rigid tension in his shoulders eased. The furious knot between his eyebrows smoothed out. A slow, languid smile spread across his face. A real smile, the first one I'd seen in weeks. He leaned back on the couch and let out a long, contented sigh. "Wow," he said, his voice warm and relaxed. He looked over at Kelly. "Hey, sorry I was being an ass." The anger was gone. The resentment was gone. He looked at Stevenson, not with hatred, but with a kind of mild, detached amusement. The pill had worked. It had done the impossible. It had made the situation bearable. "Told you," Stevenson said, holding the other pill out to me. "Your turn, man." I looked at Ryan, at the peace on his face, a peace I hadn't seen since before Kelly came home. I thought of the anxiety coiling in my own gut, the constant heartbreak of seeing him so close and so far away. I wanted that peace. I wanted to escape, just for a few hours. I took the pill. The warmth started in my stomach, a pleasant, spreading heat. It moved up my chest and down my limbs, as if my veins were being filled with warm honey. The looping, anxious thoughts that had been running circles in my head for weeks slowed down, grew quiet, and then simply stopped. The sharp edges of my grief, my jealousy, my fear, they all dissolved. The room took on a soft, benevolent glow. I could look at Kelly, at Stevenson, at Ryan, and feel nothing but a gentle, floating sense of calm. Kelly's insane plan no longer seemed monstrous. It was just a thing, and it was okay. For the first time since Stevenson arrived, we all sat in the same room and talked. We laughed. Ryan told a funny story from work. Stevenson talked about a surf spot in Oregon. Kelly glowed, seeing her vision finally, chemically, realized. The opiate wrapped us all in its warm, synthetic blanket, smothering the conflict. It made the lie feel true. As I felt the pleasant, heavy drift toward sleep, a dangerous, seductive thought surfaced, clear as a bell. This works. This actually helps. Chapter 11. The New Ritual. In the weeks that followed, the pills became the punctuation mark at the end of our days. What began as a desperate, one-time measure of relief quickly morphed into a quiet, unspoken ritual. The question, did Stevenson get his refill, replaced, "What's for dinner?" as the most important query of the evening. The tension in the apartment didn't disappear. It was simply managed. We learned to live with the low-level hum of resentment and anxiety, knowing that a reliable chemical peace was only a few hours away. An evening script went like this. We'd return from work, the interactions between us brittle and brief. Ryan would retreat. Kelly would busy herself with Kai. Stevenson would put on music. I would count the minutes. Around 8 o'clock, Stevenson would shake the little orange bottle, the rattle of the pills a secular call to prayer. We'd swallow them down and wait for the miracle. The high became a familiar country. I learned the geography of it, the warm coastline of the onset, the rolling hills of the peak, the slow, hazy valley of the Comodown. It was a place where I was a better version of myself. The anxious, heartbroken Michael was left behind in the sober world. High Michael was calm, witty, and magnanimous. High Michael could listen to Kelly talk about her day and not feel a stab of resentment. He could look at Stevenson lounging on the couch and feel a sense of detached brotherhood. Most importantly, High Michael could be near Ryan and feel a ghostly echo of their former intimacy. The drugs created a false community. We'd talk for hours, our voices low and syrupy, sharing deep thoughts and profound observations that would evaporate by morning. We were 4 astronauts floating in a warm, weightless space, tethered to nothing. The ugliness of our reality, the betrayals, the lies, the impossible situation couldn't penetrate the thick, soft atmosphere of the high. The first sign of trouble came when Stevenson, rattling the bottle, announced, "Uh-oh," down to the last 4. A flicker of pure animal panic went through me. I saw it in Ryan's eyes, too. The sober world, with all its sharp edges and unbearable tensions, was waiting for us. The vacation was about to end. "When's your next refill?" Kelly asked, her voice a little too casual. Not for another 2 weeks, he said with a shrug. Gotta make these last. That night, after we'd taken our final allotted pill, I found Ryan on the lanai, staring out at the city lights. He looked more peaceful than I'd seen him in days. The high had smoothed him out as it always did. See? He said softly, turning to me with a gentle, placid smile. It's not so bad. He was talking about everything. Stevenson, Kelly, us, the whole mess. And in that moment, floating alongside him in our chemical Eden, I believed him. I leaned against the railing next to him, our shoulders touching, and I clung to the illusion. The problem wasn't the situation. The problem was being sober in it. The drug wasn't the trap. It was the key. Chapter 12, Chasing the Ghost. The illusion shattered 2 days later. Stevenson's prescription was gone, and the warm blanket of the high was replaced by the sandpaper reality of withdrawal. The world came back, sharp and loud and hostile. Every light was too bright. Every sound was a physical assault. A deep, gnawing ache settled into my bones. A flu-like misery that sleep couldn't touch. The apartment, once our tense sanctuary, became a cage filled with irritable, twitchy animals. Kelly snapped at Stevenson. Stevenson sulked on the couch. I spent an entire afternoon curled in my bed, my skin clammy and my stomach churning. But Ryan was the worst. He was a caged tiger, pacing the apartment, his face pale and slick with sweat, his hands shaking so badly he could barely light a cigarette. The ghost he had been was gone, replaced by a man vibrating with raw, desperate misery. By evening, he couldn't take it anymore. I have to do something, he rasped, pulling on a hoodie. He grabbed all the cash from the tip jar we kept on the kitchen counter. I know a guy. A dishwasher from the old place. Stay here. The hour he was gone was the longest of my life. The casual act of shaking pills from a clean prescription bottle felt a world away from what was happening now. Ryan, out in the darkness, meeting some shadow from the underbelly of the restaurant world to buy drugs. He came back looking spooked, his eyes wide. He didn't have pills. He had a small, crumpled plastic baggie filled with a coarse, off-white powder. There was no ritual this time, no gentle slide into peace. He dumped a small pile onto a cracked CD case, cut it into lines with a credit card, and snorted it with a rolled-up dollar bill, his movements frantic and ugly. He offered the next line to me. There was no hesitation. I was in too much pain to have principles. The high was completely different. There was no warm, slow wave. It was a chemical explosion behind my eyes, a frantic rush that obliterated thought, feeling, everything. It wasn't a warm blanket. It was a total blackout. The relief was immense, but it was dirty. It felt desperate. We were no longer sedated, we were annihilated. The next day at work, the consequences began to bleed into our real lives. Ramsey, who was now managing, pulled me aside by the walk-in cooler. "Mike, what the hell is going on?" he demanded, his face a mixture of anger and genuine concern. "You look like death. You were an hour late." Ryan dropped a full tray of drinks during the lunch rush. I had 3 different tables complain that their server seemed out of it. "You guys are my best people, but this is a mess. Get your shit together." Shame washed over me, hot and sickening. I mumbled an apology, an excuse about being sick, a lie that felt pathetic even as I said it. That night, the 4 of us got high again. But the easy, false intimacy was gone. The drugs no longer brought us together. Stevenson put on headphones and disappeared into his own world. Kelly methodically organized her closet, her movements jerky and unnatural. Ryan just stared at the TV, his eyes glassy and vacant. I sat on the floor, feeling the frantic rush fade into a profound, chilling loneliness. I looked at Ryan's distant profile, and a horrifying realization settled over me. We used to do this with each other, to create a shared space where we could stand to be together. Now we were just getting high in the same room, each of us escaping into our own private oblivion. The drug that had promised to connect us was just atomizing us, leaving each of us more alone than ever before. Chapter 13. A different kind of cruelty. The hunt became our lives. The days were no longer measured by sunrises or work schedules, but by the gnawing, anxious countdown to the next score. The joy was long gone. We weren't chasing a high anymore. We were running from the hell of being straight. The apartment was a reflection of our collective state. Ashtrays overflowing, dirty dishes piled in the sink, a thin film of grime covering every surface. We were living in a squalor that mirrored the decay within our own bodies. One afternoon, in a rare moment of quiet, Ryan and I were the only ones home. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall, the telltale sheen of sweat on his brow. He looked exhausted, haunted. A wave of pity, a ghostly echo of the love I still felt for him, washed over me. Forgetting the cold war that now existed between us, I walked over and placed a hand gently on his shoulder, a simple, instinctive gesture of comfort. He flinched as if I'd burned him. He whipped around, his eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. "What are you doing?" he hissed, knocking my hand away. "Don't fucking touch me like that." I recoiled, stunned into silence. "Ryan, I was just what?" he sneered, his voice dripping with a cruelty I had never heard from him before. He stood up, towering over me, his body vibrating with a furious, ugly energy. "Don't you get it? This isn't that little game we were playing when Kelly was gone. That's over." He gestured wildly around the wrecked apartment. "She's with him now. The happy family thing is a joke. It's just me, and if it's just me and you..." He paused, and his lips twisted around the next word as if it were poison. "You know what that makes me? It makes me a faggot. Is that what you want, Mike? You want everyone to look at Ryan, the big fucking failure, and call him a faggot?" The word hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just a slur. It was a weapon, and he was aiming it directly at the most vulnerable part of my heart. He was taking the thing we shared, the secret Eden that had felt so real and pure to me, and dousing it in shame, recasting it as something dirty and pathetic. He wasn't just rejecting me. He was trying to annihilate the memory of us. Tears sprang to my eyes, hot and shameful. "That's not what it was," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I don't give a shit what it was," he spat, his face contorted with a mixture of self-loathing and rage. "It's over. Stay away from me." He turned and stormed into his bedroom, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed the finality of his words. I stood alone in the trashed kitchen, the silence ringing in my ears. The man I loved was gone. In his place was this stranger, this terrified, hateful addict who would burn down everything we ever had just to avoid looking at his own reflection. The drugs weren't the only thing killing him. His own fear was doing the job just as well. Chapter 14. The Witness. After Ryan's outburst, the Cold War escalated into a state of armed and hostile neutrality. We did not speak. We did not make eye contact. We moved through the apartment like ghosts from different, warring timelines. Our misery a thick, suffocating fog. My heartbreak curdled into a grim, hollowed-out sense of survival. For the first time, I began to see the wreckage with clear eyes, and I was horrified. The final explosion came, as I knew it would. It wasn't a single fight. It was a series of rolling detonations over 2 days. It started over money. The rent was late, and our pooled tip money had vanished up Ryan's nose. It escalated into a screaming match between Ryan and Kelly in the living room, and their voices raw with months of unsaid bitterness. They threw every failure, every betrayal, every disappointment at each other like stones. "I can't do this anymore." Kelly finally shrieked, her face streaked with tears. "I can't live like this. I can't have Kai around this." "So leave." Ryan roared back, his face a mask of fury. "Take him and go be with your fucking yoga instructor. Go build your perfect family somewhere else." That was it. The next day, Kelly packed. She moved with the quiet, determined efficiency of a refugee fleeing a war zone. Stevenson, who had watched the final fight with the detached air of someone watching a nature documentary, helped her load her car. She was moving in with another waitress from the restaurant for now. She took Kai, his favorite toys, and all the light that was left in the apartment. She didn't even say goodbye to Ryan. The aftermath was an eerie, toxic silence. The apartment was now occupied by a new broken trinity. A shell-shocked Michael, a silently brooding Ryan, and a vaguely uncomfortable Stevenson, who seemed to realize far too late that he had massively misread the situation. That evening, as the three of us were stewing in our own private circles of hell, there was a knock on the door. Confused, I opened it. Standing in the hallway was a kid, maybe 16 years old, with Ryan's eyes and a nervous, hopeful smile. He was surrounded by 2 large suitcases. It was Julian, Ryan's younger brother. "Hey," he said, his voice bright with an optimism that felt like it belonged to another planet. "Surprise. Mom and Dad thought it would be great for me to spend the summer out here with Ryan. You know, build some character before junior year." He beamed, expecting a warm welcome. He stepped inside, and his smile faltered as he took in the scene. He saw the overflowing ashtrays, the empty beer bottles, the general squalor. He saw Stevenson, a stranger, passed out on the couch. He saw me, looking haunted and gaunt. And then he saw his older brother. Ryan emerged from his room, his eyes glassy and unfocused, his skin pale, a ghost shambling into the dim light. Julian's face fell, the youthful excitement replaced by a sudden, dawning horror. He had walked into a paradise of his own imagining and found himself in our hell. His innocent presence was a spotlight, a perfect, merciless mirror held up to the wreckage of our lives, showing us with undeniable clarity the monsters we had become. And in that moment, a new and sharper terror seized me, not for us, but for him. Chapter 15. A Glimmer of Shame. For a long moment, nobody moved. We were three figures in a tableau of ruin, frozen by the bright, innocent light Julian had dragged in with his suitcases. He stood on the threshold, his hopeful smile slowly wilting as he processed the scene. The grime, the stranger on the couch, the ghost of his brother emerging from the shadows. I saw it all through his eyes, and a hot, profound shame, a feeling I thought I'd lost the capacity for, washed over me. Then Ryan moved, and it wasn't with the slow, drugged shuffle I'd grown used to. It was a sudden, jerky motion, a puppet whose strings had just been violently yanked. Shame had animated him. "Julian, what the hell are you doing here?" he asked, his voice a rough croak. He ran a hand through his greasy hair, trying to smooth it down. He kicked at an empty pizza box on the floor. "Get up," he snapped at Stevenson, who stirred, grunted, and rolled over on the couch. "Mom and Dad said they called you," Julian said, his voice small now, uncertain. He took a hesitant step inside. "They said you were cool with it." "Yeah, right. Cool with it," Ryan mumbled, his eyes darting around the room as if seeing the squalor for the very first time. He began moving with a frantic, pathetic energy, gathering empty bottles, snatching up overflowing ashtrays. It was the frantic housekeeping of a man trying to hide a dead body seconds before the police arrive. The body was his own life. I knew I had to intervene. "Hey, Julian. I'm Michael," I said, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. "It's awesome to meet you. Ryan talks about you all the time. It was a lie, but it was a kind one. Let's get your stuff. You can bunk with me for now. It's no problem." I grabbed one of his suitcases, trying to create a bubble of normalcy around him to steer him away from the wreckage. He followed me, casting a worried look back at his brother, who was now just standing in the middle of the room, staring at his own hands as if he didn't know whose they were. The attempt to play house, to pretend we were just a couple of chill surfer dudes in a Waikiki apartment, lasted less than 12 hours. The gnawing need of addiction doesn't give a damn about brotherly love or shame. Later that night, I saw the familiar signs in Ryan, the restlessness, the clammy sheen on his skin. He disappeared into the bathroom for 20 minutes. Julian, who had been trying to show me pictures of his friends on a digital camera, kept looking at the closed door. "Is Ryan okay?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "He seems really sick." The direct question from this child, the genuine concern in his eyes, felt like a physical blow. He was looking to me for an answer, for reassurance. Lying to Kelly, to Ramsey, to myself had become second nature. But lying to this kid felt like an entirely new category of sin. "Yeah, man," I said, the lie clotting in my throat. "He's just going through some stuff. A lot of stress at work." Julian nodded, but he didn't look convinced. He looked scared. I saw the trust in his eyes begin to curdle into confusion, and I felt the weight of my complicity settle on me like a shroud. I wasn't just a participant in this disaster anymore. I was a gatekeeper, a liar, actively hiding the rot from an innocent, and that felt infinitely worse. Chapter 16. An Education in Ruin. Julian tried. God, he tried. For a week, he was a relentless engine of youthful hope. He'd wake up early, full of energy, and try to rally the troops. "Hey, the surf at Queens is supposed to be good. Let's go!" he'd say to the lump on the couch that was Stevenson. "Ryan, can you teach me how to bottom turn like you used to?" he'd ask his brother, who would just grunt from behind his bedroom door. His attempts to inject life into our morgue were met with a wall of drug-fueled apathy. His education in Hawaii wasn't about surfing. It was an immersive, accelerated course in addiction and decay. He learned not to ask why shady-looking guys showed up at our door for 5-minute visits. He learned what the acrid smell of burning foil meant. He learned to recognize the difference between Ryan's glassy-eyed high and his twitchy, irritable sickness. The hope in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a kind of weary vigilance. His presence changed me, too. The need to lie to him, to shield him, became my new obsession. It was an impossible, exhausting task. I started trying to use less, to keep a clear head, if only to have the energy to counter the poison in the air. I became his de facto guardian. I took him surfing. I took him to get plate lunch. I did everything I could to get him out of the apartment, away from his brother. This new role created another fracture between me and Ryan. He saw my efforts not as an attempt to protect his brother, but as a judgment against him. "Stop trying to be his fucking dad, Mike," he snarled at me one afternoon when I came back with Julian, both of us sandy and tired from a few hours at the beach. "You think you're better than me?" "I think he's 16, Ryan," I shot back, my voice shaking with a fury I hadn't felt in months. "He shouldn't be here. He shouldn't be seeing this." "Then maybe you should all just get the fuck out," he said, before retreating back into the darkness of his room. The confrontation Julian had been avoiding finally happened. He found me on the lanai one evening, my hands trembling as I tried to get a crushed bit of a pill to stay on a piece of foil. I didn't even hear him come out. "What is that?" he asked, his voice quiet, trembling. "What are you guys doing? Is that why Ryan is like this?" The question, so direct, so full of pain, shattered my defenses. I couldn't lie anymore. I just shook my head, unable to speak, and let the foil drop from my shaking hands. His young face crumpled. "I don't understand," he whispered. He was my hero. Ryan's abdication as an older brother was now complete. The shame Julian's arrival had sparked was gone, burned away and replaced by the hard, defensive shell of his addiction. He no longer tried to hide it. The dynamic settled into its final, tragic form. A few nights later, Julian and I were in the living room, watching a movie, a pathetic attempt to create a two-person bubble of normalcy. The door to Ryan's room opened. He shambled out, looking right through us as if we were ghosts. He grabbed a beer from the fridge, his movements slow and disconnected. He didn't say a word. He just turned and disappeared back into his room, closing the door on the world, on his brother, on everything. Julian watched him go, and I saw the last flicker of his childhood hope die in his eyes. It was replaced by a look of profound, adult disillusionment, and I realized with a certainty that felt like a physical blow that I couldn't save him. I couldn't protect him from this. The poison was in the walls, in the air, in the man his brother had become. We were all breathing it in, and it was only a matter of time before it consumed us all. Chapter 17, The Bottom. The last straw wasn't a gunshot, but a quiet click. The click of our apartment door opening late one night. I was in the kitchen, drinking a glass of water, the only one awake. I expected to see Ryan returning from God knows where. Instead, a man I'd never seen before, with dead eyes and a spiderweb tattoo on his neck, stepped inside. He looked around, saw me, and his mouth tightened into a sneer. "Where's Ryan?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. "He owes me." My blood ran cold. Before I could answer, a floorboard creaked from the hallway. Julian stood there, roused by the noise, his eyes wide with sleep and confusion. The man's dead-eyed gaze flickered to him, and in that moment I saw the endgame with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a movie. This wasn't a tragic romance. This was a dirty, dangerous reality where people got hurt, and I had dragged an innocent child directly into the line of fire. "He's not here," I said, my voice shaking as I moved to stand between the man and Julian. "Get out." To my profound relief, he just grunted, gave me one last threatening look, and left. The door clicked shut again. I stood there, trembling, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at Julian's pale, terrified face. The image of that man's eyes on him, on this kid I was supposed to be protecting, was the rock bottom I didn't know I was looking for. The heartbreak over losing Ryan, the self-pity, the daily misery, it all burned away, replaced by a single cold, crystalline thought. This has to end now. The next morning, while Ryan was passed out in his room, I made the call. My hands shook as I dialed the number for his parents' house in California. His mom answered, her voice warm and familiar. It almost broke me. "Mrs. Davison," I said, my own voice sounding like a stranger's. It's Michael. I need you to listen to me. You need to bring Julian home. Now. It's not safe for him here anymore. I didn't tell her everything. I couldn't. But I told her enough. That the living situation had deteriorated, that there were dangerous people around, that Ryan was not himself. There was a stunned, heartbroken silence on the other end of the line, then a quiet, tearful, "Okay, we'll book the first flight we can." When I told Ryan what I'd done, he exploded. He backed me against a wall, his face inches from mine, his breath sour. "You what? You called my parents? You went behind my back and aired our dirty laundry." "There was a man in our house last night looking for you, Ryan," I yelled, shoving him back. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of his anger. My new resolve was a shield. "He saw Julian. This is over. I'm getting him out." The fight went out of him, replaced by a look of utter, desolate defeat. He knew I was right. 2 days later, I was at the airport with Julian, his return ticket in his hand. The buoyant optimism he'd arrived with was gone, replaced by a bruised, weary sadness. "Is he going to be okay?" Julian asked, looking at me with old eyes. "I don't know," I said honestly. It was the first complete truth I'd told him. "I'm going to try." He gave me a quick, hard hug. "You be okay, Mike?" I watched him walk down the jet bridge, the same one Kelly had walked down what felt like a lifetime ago. He disappeared inside. The rescue mission was half complete. I had gotten the witness out. Now I had to turn around, walk back into the wreckage, and try to save myself. Chapter 18. The Longest Week. I walked back into the silent apartment and headed straight for the bathroom. I took the small baggie of powder I had hidden in the medicine cabinet, my emergency stash, the thing that kept the deepest horrors at bay, and without letting myself think, I dumped it into the toilet and flushed. I watched the white powder swirl and disappear. Day 1. The first 24 hours were a lie. I felt a sense of virtuous resolve, a clarity I hadn't had in months. I cleaned the apartment with manic energy, scrubbing away the grime as if I could scrub away the sin. Then, the sickness began its slow, creeping invasion. It started with a yawn I couldn't finish and eyes that wouldn't stop watering. By day 2, a deep, restless ache had settled into my bones. My legs wouldn't stay still, kicking and twitching with a life of their own. By day 3, I was in hell. It was a full-body agony, a feeling like my skeleton was trying to claw its way out of my skin. My stomach was a knot of fire. I thrashed in my bed, soaked in sweat, then shivered with a cold so profound I thought my heart would stop. I was a prisoner in my own body, and my own body was a torture chamber. The physical misery was matched by a psychological onslaught. Every failure, every regret, every shame I'd ever felt played on a relentless loop in my mind. Kelly's trusting face, Julian's scared eyes, Ryan's kiss on the lanai, his hateful sneer in the kitchen, it all swirled together in a fever dream of regret. Ryan ignored me at first. He was still furious with me for calling his parents. But on the third night, as I was heaving the last of the water from my stomach into the toilet, he appeared in the doorway. He just stood there for a moment, then disappeared. He came back with a cold, wet washcloth and a bottle of Gatorade, which he left on the floor next to me. He became my reluctant nurse. He didn't speak, but he would find me shivering and put a blanket over me. He'd force me to drink water. On the 4th day, at the absolute peak of the agony, when I was lying on my sweat-soaked mattress, crying from the sheer, unending pain in my bones, he sat on the edge of the bed. He held the cool cloth to my forehead, his touch gentle. He was, in those moments, the Ryan I had fallen in love with, the caring, steady friend who could make the world feel safe. By the 5th day, the storm began to break. The pain subsided into a dull, exhausted ache. I could think again. I sat up in bed, sipping the Gatorade he'd left, and I watched him as he slept in a chair he'd pulled into my room. And as I watched his sleeping face, a new and devastating clarity washed over me. I saw the fear in the set of his jaw even in sleep. I remembered the look of sheer terror on his face when he'd found me at my worst. He wasn't watching a friend get clean. He was watching a preview of a horror movie he would do anything to avoid. This act of care wasn't a sign that he could be saved. It was the final proof that he couldn't be. He would never ever willingly walk into this fire. He was too afraid. Helping me was the last loving thing he could do before retreating forever into the numbness the drugs provided. The realization was a punch to the gut, more painful than any withdrawal symptom. The man who had just saved my life was utterly, hopelessly lost. And to save myself, I had to let him go completely. Our bond wasn't a lifeline anymore. It was a beautiful, tragic anchor, and it was pulling us both down to the bottom. Chapter 19. The Cut. In the quiet aftermath of the withdrawal, my body felt like a foreign country, fragile, alien, but mine again. My thoughts, no longer screaming through a filter of chemical noise or agonizing pain, were startlingly clear. The apartment was a tomb. Ryan had retreated so far into himself, into the drugs, that his presence was little more than a whisper of movement behind a closed door. The brief, caring intimacy we shared during my sickness was gone. A ghost that had vanished with the fever. I knew, with the kind of certainty that settles deep in your bones, that if I stayed, I would not survive. I found him in the living room, staring at the TV, though I knew he wasn't seeing it. I sat in the chair opposite him. He didn't look at me. "Ryan," I said, my voice steady, clear. "Thank you." He flinched at the sound of my voice, his first reaction to me now always one of defense. "For what?" he mumbled. "For taking care of me. I mean it. I wouldn't have made it through without you." He shrugged, his eyes still fixed on the screen. "Whatever. You were a mess." I took a deep breath. "I have to leave, Ryan." That got his attention. His head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with a flicker of panic. It wasn't the panic of a lover about to be left. It was the panic of a man about to lose a pillar, however rotten, that was helping to hold up his world. "What? What are you talking about? Where are you going to go?" "I don't know yet. Ramsey's couch, maybe. I'll figure it out." I leaned forward, my hands clasped between my knees, trying to will him to understand. "I can't stay here. I can't get better here. I can't watch you do this to yourself, and I can't stay clean if I'm watching you." His face hardened, the brief flicker of fear replaced by the familiar mask of anger. "So that's it? You feel better, so you're just bailing on me? After everything?" The accusation stung, but it didn't change anything. The clarity I had was a cold, hard shield. I stood up, my own weakness and fragility making me feel strangely powerful. "I have to," I said, and my voice was softer now, full of a sadness so profound it felt ancient. "I have to leave because I love you, Ryan. I think I always have. And because I love you, I can't stay and watch you die." I walked to my room and packed a single duffel bag. A few changes of clothes, my toothbrush, the few books I owned. It took less than 10 minutes to pack up the last 5 years of my life. I walked back through the living room. He hadn't moved. He was just a silhouette against the flickering blue light of the television. I didn't say goodbye again. I just walked out the door and closed it gently behind me, leaving my ghost to keep his company. Standing on the street under the familiar shade of the plumeria trees, I looked up at the window of the apartment that had been my home, my sanctuary, my prison, and my paradise. A wave of grief so total it almost brought me to my knees washed over me. I had lost everything. But as I slung the bag over my shoulder and started walking toward an unknown future, I felt something else too. A tiny, fragile seed of freedom. I had finally chosen to save the only person I had any power over. Myself. Chapter 20. The Call. A month passed. It was a month of living in a quiet, lonely, sober purgatory. I was sleeping on Ramsey's couch, a kindness I knew I didn't deserve. I'd found a new job washing dishes at a hotel restaurant in Ko'olina, a 45-minute drive from town. The distance was the point. My life shrank to a simple monastic routine. Work, eat, sleep, and go to meetings in drafty church basements where I listened to stories that were all different and all exactly the same as mine. I didn't speak to Ryan. I didn't speak to Stevenson. My old life was a phantom limb, an ache that was always there. The call that pulled me back came from Jameson. He was stateside for a few weeks, back in Honolulu before shipping out again. "Mike," he said, his voice strained. "I ran into a guy from the Lanai. He told me some stuff about Ryan. Man, it's bad. Really bad." "What do you mean, bad?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy drumbeat. "He lost the apartment. Got evicted. Stevenson's gone. The guy said Ryan's living out of his truck, sometimes sleeping on the beach. He said he looks... gone." Against every instinct for self-preservation I had cultivated over the last month, I agreed to meet Jameson. He drove me to a small park near Ala Moana Beach. And then I saw him. He was sitting on a bench, staring out at the ocean. The man I saw was a stranger wearing Ryan's face. He was skeletal, his skin a grayish yellow, covered in sores. His clothes were filthy. His eyes, when they finally landed on me, were hollowed-out pits of desperation. All the light, all the charisma, all the life was gone. He was a husk. He tried to smile, a ghastly motion. He asked me for $20. The casual request, the sheer, pathetic normalcy of it, broke my heart all over again. I gave him all the cash I had in my wallet, about $60. He took it without thanks, and his eyes were already scanning the park, looking for his next opportunity, his next escape. I walked away from that bench with a new and terrible clarity. My plan to save myself and hope he'd save himself was a childish fantasy. I had been tending to my own little garden while a wildfire consumed the man I loved. Leaving him wasn't enough. There was only one path left. I went back to Ramsey's apartment, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock the door. I found the number I had written down and hidden away. I sat on the floor and dialed. "Mrs. Davison," I said when she answered. This time there was no preamble, no gentle easing into the truth. This time I set a fire. "You need to listen to me," I said, my voice low and urgent, fueled by the horrifying image of Ryan on that bench. "I lied to you before. I didn't tell you the whole truth. Ryan is a drug addict. He's addicted to opiates, to heroin. He's been evicted. He's living in his truck. He weighs maybe 120 pounds. I just saw him, and he is going to die. I am not exaggerating. He has days, maybe weeks. You and your husband need to get on a plane. You need to find him, and you need to take him home. It's the only chance he has left." I laid it all bare. The progression from pills, the money, the lies, everything. I spoke with a brutal, surgical honesty, cutting through the denial I could hear in her shocked silences and pained gasps. When I was done, there was a long, ragged sob on the other end of the line. Then a whispered, "We're on our way." I hung up the phone, and the receiver felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I had just performed the most profound act of love and the most profound act of betrayal of my life. I had taken away his freedom, his agency, everything. I had called in an army to drag him away from the only thing he wanted. I didn't know if I had just saved his life, or if I had merely set the stage for his final tragic act. I just sat there on the floor, utterly drained, and waited. Chapter 21. The Rendition. The next 2 days were a vacuum. I existed in a state of suspended animation, my life reduced to waiting for a phone call. I went to work and washed dishes, my hands moving automatically while my mind was thousands of miles away, then back in a filthy truck on a Honolulu street. I was braced for anything: anger, recriminations, failure. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. It was Ryan's dad, his voice a gravely ruin held together by sheer will. "Michael, we have him." Relief and dread washed over me in equal measure. "Is he?" "He's alive," Mr. Davison said, and the way he said it told me everything about how close Ryan was to not being. He told me it took them a full day of searching, of talking to homeless people on the beach, of chasing down whispers before they found him sleeping behind a dumpster near his old surfing spot. He thanked me, and the gratitude in his voice was so heavy with pain it sounded like a sob. "Our flight is tonight," he said. "His brother Tyler is with me. We have him in a motel room, but his passport, his things, they're still in the old apartment. The landlord will let us in. Can you meet us there? We could use your help, and I think he should see you." An hour later, I was standing in the doorway of the apartment that had once been my entire world. It was even worse than when I'd left. It was a hollowed-out shell, smelling of mildew and old smoke, stripped of any life. In the middle of the living room stood Ryan's father and his older brother Tyler, two big, strong California men who looked utterly lost and broken in the face of this small, squalid room. And on the couch, Ryan sat huddled between them. He was a wraith. His head was shaved, revealing the sharp, bird-like contours of his skull. He was trembling, his body deep in the throes of withdrawal, but he seemed beyond fighting. He was docile, defeated, a child being taken home after a terrible, life-altering mistake. Our eyes met across the room. There was no anger in his gaze, no hatred, just a deep, bottomless, and horribly lucid sadness. He knew exactly what was happening. I helped them pack a bag for him, an act of bizarre, heartbreaking domesticity. I folded the few clean clothes he had left. I found his passport in a drawer full of takeout menus. At one point, His father left the room to call the airline, and Tyler went to the truck to get some water. Ryan and I were alone. He looked at me, a flicker of the old Ryan in his tired eyes. "You did this," he whispered. His voice was a dry rustle. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. My throat was too tight to speak. I just nodded, my eyes filling with tears. "I had to," I finally choked out. He held my gaze for a long moment, and in that look I saw everything. The lanai, the North Shore, the shared laughter, the secret kisses, the cruelty, the love, the betrayal, the end. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a final acknowledgement of everything we were. His father and brother came back into the room. They moved with a gentle, practiced efficiency, each taking one of Ryan's arms and helping him to his feet. They guided his frail, trembling body toward the door, their movements full of a love so fierce and so helpless it was painful to watch. I stood by the window and watched them get into their rental car. Ryan was in the back, sandwiched between his father and brother, a prisoner being taken to his salvation. The car pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner. I had done it. I had handed him over. I had saved him. But as I stood alone in the empty, silent apartment, the only thing I felt was the cold, certain, and terrifying premonition that I would never see him again. Chapter 22, 70 miles an hour. I spent the next 2 days trying to breathe. I went to my dishwashing job, the clatter of plates a welcome noise to drown out the silence in my head. I went to a meeting and listened to a woman talk about her 30-day chip, a milestone that felt as unattainable as climbing Everest. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart seized, caught between the desperate hope for good news and the paralyzing fear of bad. I imagined him in his childhood room in California, his parents watching over him, the first painful steps of a long, long recovery beginning. I clung to that image. The phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon as I was walking home from the bus stop. It was Ryan's dad. My heart leaped into my throat. "Mr. Davison," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "How is he? Is he okay?" The sound that came through the phone was not a voice. It was the sound of a man's soul being ripped apart, a raw, guttural sob that seemed to come from the center of the earth. "Michael," he finally choked out, his voice completely destroyed. "Michael, there was an accident. Last night, Ryan. He's gone." The world stopped. The Waikiki traffic, the chatter of tourists, the rustle of the palm trees, it all just ceased to exist. What? The word was a puff of air, a stupid, useless sound. "We got him home," his dad said, the story tumbling out between broken, ragged sobs. "The first day was hell, but we were managing. We were with him. Yesterday, he got into a terrible fight with us. He said we'd imprisoned him, that we were trying to kill him. He ran, Michael. He just bolted out of the house." He paused, taking a shuddering breath. "There's a truck stop on the highway a few miles from us. It's a bad place, known for people selling things. He was running for it. We saw him. We were in the car, trying to catch up to him. He ran right out onto the highway. It was dark." The silence stretched, and I knew what was coming next, but my mind refused to form the image. "A truck," Mr. Davison whispered, his voice cracking into a million pieces. "It was going 70 miles an hour. He never saw it. The police said he died instantly, Michael. They said he didn't suffer." The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the pavement. I sank to my knees on the sidewalk, oblivious to the people stepping around me. The details echoed in the sudden, silent void of my mind. A truck stop. The highway. 70 miles an hour. The finality of it was absolute. A concrete wall my mind kept slamming into. There was no more hope. There was no long recovery. There was no chance to make amends. There was no more Ryan. I had done everything right. I had gotten him out. I had put him in the hands of the people who loved him most. And all I had done, in the end, was deliver him from a slow death in paradise to a quick, brutal one on a dark California highway. The weight of it, the crushing, absolute weight of my love and my failure, was the only thing left in the world. Chapter 23. The Language of Grief. The world came back in pieces. First, the feeling of rough concrete under my palms, then the shuffling feet of strangers parting around me like a river around a stone. Then Ramsey's face, full of alarm, his hands helping me to my feet, guiding me back to his apartment as if I were a blind man. I don't remember the walk. I remember sinking onto his couch, the phone still clutched in my hand, its screen dark. For 2 days, I didn't speak. I just existed in the silent, echoing crater Ryan's death had left behind. On the third day, I knew I had to call them. My hands trembled as I dialed, terrified of the voice on the other end, terrified of the shared, unbearable weight of our loss. Mr. Davison answered. "Michael," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. There was no blame, no anger. There was only a shared devastation, a common language of grief that needed no translation. "The funeral is on Saturday. We want you to be here. You need to be here." "I don't know if I can," I whispered. "You were his family, son," he said, his voice breaking. "You were our son's family. Please come home." I flew to California the next day. Stepping off the plane into the dry, oppressive heat of the Central Valley felt like stepping onto another planet. Tyler, Ryan's brother, picked me up. He was quieter, his face etched with new lines of sorrow. We drove in near silence to his parents' house, a sprawling suburban home on a street lined with perfectly manicured lawns. It was the life Ryan had run from, the world that had created him. His mother opened the door before we even reached it. She was a small, kind-faced woman with Ryan's eyes. The moment she saw me, her composure crumbled. She threw her arms around me, and we just held each other, two strangers bound by the love of the person we had both lost in different ways. We cried, not for ourselves, but for him. They gave me Ryan's childhood bedroom. It was a museum of a life I'd never known. Surfing trophies from his high school team lined a bookshelf. Posters for The Clash and Bad Religion were taped to the walls. There was a framed photo on his nightstand of him and Tyler as teenagers, grinning, tan, and impossibly young, their arms slung around each other on a beach. This was the boy before the world got its hands on him, before the darkness found its way in. This was the Ryan I had only ever seen in flashes. That night I lay on his bed, the familiar scent of his laundry detergent still clinging to the sheets. I was surrounded by the ghost of his innocence. The shock that had encased my heart like ice finally cracked, and a wave of pure, undiluted grief, a pain so immense it felt physical, washed over me. I curled into a ball, buried my face in his pillow, and wept until there was nothing left. Chapter 24. The Reckoning and the Return. The funeral was a surreal, out-of-body experience. Friends of the family told stories about Ryan the champion swimmer, Ryan the funny, popular kid. It was a portrait of a boy I barely knew. Then I saw Kelly slip into a back pew. She had flown in from Honolulu, looking small and lost. After the service, we stood outside in the stark California sunlight, a few feet apart. "I'm so sorry, Mike," she said, her voice hollow. Her face was a mask of grief, and for the first time, a devastating understanding of the consequences of her own naive vision. The fantasy of her perfect modern family had ended here, in a cemetery, under a sky too bright and blue to bear. "I know," I said. There was no anger left in me. We were just two survivors of the same shipwreck, forever tethered to the same loss. Later, back at the house, Mr. Davison found me standing by the pool, staring at the water. He was holding a small carved wooden box. "We wanted you to have some of his ashes," he said quietly, pressing the box into my hands. "It was surprisingly heavy, and I want you to know something. He loved you. I know he did. He was so afraid of everything, especially of himself." He put a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. "What you did, that call you made, that was the bravest, most loving thing anyone could have done for my son. Don't you ever for a second think otherwise." His words were a gift, a final, painful absolution. It was the validation Ryan could never give me himself. I flew back to Hawaii the next day. The island didn't feel like paradise anymore. It didn't feel like hell either. It was just a place. A collection of streets and buildings and beaches, all haunted by memories. Months passed, the seasons changed from hot and sunny to slightly less hot and rainy. I kept going to my meetings. I kept washing dishes. I kept putting one foot in front of the other. One day my phone rang. It was Jameson. He was back. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't push. He just showed up. We walked along the beach at Fort DeRussie, not saying much. He listened when I talked. He sat in comfortable silence when I didn't. His steady, uncomplicated friendship was an anchor, a quiet testament to a different kind of love, not the all-consuming destructive fire I had shared with Ryan, but a slow, warm, and durable light. On the 1-year anniversary of his death, I drove out to the North Shore. I took the small wooden box with me. I parked at Sunset Beach, our spot, and walked to the water's edge. The waves were gentle, the sky a pale, soft blue. I waded out until the water was up to my waist, the Pacific cool against my skin. I opened the box and tilted it, letting the ashes drift out and meet the water. They swirled for a moment, a gray cloud in the crystalline blue, before dissolving and being carried out to sea. "Goodbye, Ryan," I whispered. I didn't know what my future held. The grief was a part of me now, a scar on my soul that would never fully fade. But as I stood there, feeling the gentle pull of the tide, I knew I was alive. I was sober. I had survived. And sometimes survival is the only victory there is. The sun was setting, painting the horizon in familiar, violent shades of orange and purple. I turned my back to the ocean and walked toward the shore, one step at a time. Epilogue. 10 years later. The morning light in Kailua is soft and forgiving. It filters through the open roll-up door of my workshop, carrying the scent of salt and blooming hibiscus. The air inside smells of surfboard resin, sawdust, and coffee. 10 years ago, my mornings smelled of stale beer, regret, and the acrid smoke of chasing a ghost. It's a trade I've made every single day since, and I have never once looked back. My hands, steady now, move a planer along the foam blank on the racks before me. The motion is rhythmic, meditative. I'm shaping a new longboard, carving clean, precise lines where there was once only a formless block. My life has been much the same. The screen door to the house creaks open, and Jameson walks in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He doesn't have to ask how I take it. After 7 years together, 6 of them in this house, our routines are a comfortable, unspoken language. He's still in the military, but his work is mostly stateside now. His demeanor as steady and calm as it was the first day I met him. The quiet kindness I couldn't accept back then has become the foundation of my world. "How's she looking?" he asks, setting a mug on my workbench. "Like a surfboard," I say with a small smile. He puts an arm around my shoulders and kisses my temple. His love isn't a fire that threatens to consume me. It's a warm, steady hearth. It's the home I never thought I'd have. He heads back inside to get ready for work, and I'm left alone with my thoughts. It was 10 years ago this week. For a long time, the anniversary was a day I dreaded. A 24-hour period of navigating a minefield of grief and guilt. Now, it's just a day. A quieter day, perhaps. A more reflective one. The pain his sock-gaping wound has become a scar, a part of my topography, a reminder of where I've been, but no longer a source of constant agony. It no longer defines my borders. On the far wall of the workshop, hanging in a place of honor, is Ryan's old board, the one his father gave me. It's cleaned up, the dings repaired, its finish gleaming in the morning light. It's not a shrine. It's a memorial. It is the artifact of a brilliant, beautiful, and broken boy who taught me everything about love, loss, and the desperate, terrifying fragility of life. I can look at it now and smile, remembering the effortless grace with which he rode a wave, a grace he could never find on land. I remember the love, not just the tragedy. Sometimes I think about the others. Kelly sends a Christmas card every year. She's a yoga teacher in San Diego now, married to a man with a kind face. The photo on the card is always of her and Kai. He's a teenager now, tall and lanky with his father's eyes and Kelly's smile. Seeing him grow up, even from a distance, brings a complicated ache, a sadness for all that Ryan missed, and a quiet gratitude that the boy is happy and safe. Jameson comes back out, dressed for work. "Don't forget you have your meeting tonight," he says. "I won't," I tell him. "It's my home group. I'll be picking up my 10-year chip. A decade. A lifetime." After he leaves, I finish sanding, my focus absolute. The board is smooth, perfect, ready for glassing. I wipe the dust from my hands and walk outside, looking toward the jagged green peaks of the Ko'olau Mountains. The air is warm, the sky is clear, and the world is quiet. I am no longer just a survivor of a great tragedy. I am a man who builds things, a man who loves and is loved in return, a man who can stand in the Hawaiian sun and feel its warmth instead of its fire. I think of Ryan one last time, and I send a silent thank you into the vast blue expanse. A thank you for the joy, for the pain, for the lessons, for the love that, in its own destructive way, set me on the path to this very spot. I am here because I lost him, and I am finally, truly okay with that. I take a deep breath of the clean morning air and I go back inside to get ready for my day. Prologue. The needle was a clean, quiet thing. A small prick, a slow plunge, And then the warmth bloomed in my chest, a blossoming flower of pure benevolent calm that chased the anxiety from my bones and smoothed the rough edges of the world. The roar of life became a gentle hum. Ramsay sighed contentedly beside me on the floor, his head lolling back against the bare drywall. "See?" he said, his voice a happy slur. "Better than paying for therapy." I just nodded, letting the warmth spread down to my fingertips. We were in his new house in Kahala, a place he could afford because his parents had money, and he didn't have a drug habit as expensive as mine. It was empty, the rooms echoing with our soft breathing. All his furniture was still at his old place on the North Shore. "So this is it, huh?" I said, looking at the sterile white emptiness. "Big move to town." "Had to," he said, his eyes closed. "Can't really have a nursery next to my DJ setup." He chuckled. "My best friend from high school, Ryan, and his wife Kelly, the ones I told you about, they're moving in up there. They just had a baby." I tried to process the words through the pleasant, synthetic fog. Wife, baby, family. The concepts felt alien, like words from a language I didn't speak. They belonged to other people, people who lived in lighted houses with matching furniture and plans for the future. The idea was so foreign, I couldn't even form an opinion on it. It was just noise. "Huh," was all I said. A week later, the world was loud again. My apartment was overflowing with people for my 22nd birthday. The music was shaking the floor, and the air was thick with smoke and cheap beer. I was holding court, laughing, feeling like the king of a small, grimy kingdom. I saw Ramsay push his way through the crowd, a girl following in his wake. And when I say a girl, I mean the kind of girl that makes a whole room quiet down for a second just to watch her pass through. She was stunning, with a cascade of blonde hair and a smile that seemed to generate its own light. "Mike, this is Kelly," Ramsay shouted over the music. "Kelly, this is the birthday boy." She smiled at me, and I smiled back. Then Ramsay pulled me aside. "Hey man, so she needs a job, like yesterday. You guys are always hiring at the Lanai, right? Think you could get her in? She's a great server." "Yeah, sure," I said, already distracted by someone handing me another drink. "Have her come by tomorrow." It was a simple favor for a friend, nothing more. A couple of weeks later, she was part of the chaos at the restaurant. She was good too. Fast, efficient, and she could charm a table of angry, sunburned tourists into doubling their tip. During a brutal Saturday night rush, she waved me over to a table in her section. "Mike, come here," she called out. "I want you to finally meet them." Sitting at the table was a man, and on his lap was a tiny, sleeping baby in a carrier. I'd seen them from a distance when they'd come to pick her up. But this was the first time I was face to face with them. With him. "This is my husband, Ryan," Kelly said, beaming, "and this little guy is Kai." My eyes met Ryan's, and the strangest thing happened. It was a jolt, a flicker of recognition, like seeing someone you were sure you'd known your whole life, but couldn't place from where. He had kind eyes, a sharp jaw, and a smile that wasn't as bright as Kelly's, but was somehow more real. He looked tired, but he looked at her with an adoration that was palpable. "Hey," he said, his voice calm and low amidst the restaurant's storm. "I'm the guy whose wife you saved. Thanks for getting her the job." "No problem," I said, unable to look away. "She's a natural." The interaction lasted 30 seconds, but it lingered with me for the rest of my shift. The next night, I got off early. I went up to the hotel's upstairs pool bar, our usual after-work haunt, to decompress before heading home. I was sitting alone, nursing a beer, watching the torches cast flickering shadows on the water. "Anyone sitting here?" I looked up. It was Ryan. He was alone. "It's all yours," I said, gesturing to the chair opposite me. He sat down, ordered a beer, and turned to me. "So," he said, "you're the famous Michael." And that was it. That's how it started. The conversation that followed was the easiest one I'd ever had in my life. We didn't talk about our jobs or his new baby. We talked about the waves at Sunset Beach, about the frustrating superiority of regular footers, about the first time we both heard Jeff Buckley, about the strange feeling of living in a paradise that belonged to other people. We talked like two people, picking up a conversation that had been interrupted years ago. We finished each other's sentences. We laughed at the same stupid things. I saw in him a reflection of a part of myself I didn't know existed. He was smart, he was funny, he was sad in a way that I recognized, And as the night went on and the bar emptied out, I had the distinct, terrifying, and exhilarating feeling that my life, the one I had known up to that point, was over. This man, this stranger who felt more familiar than my own skin, was about to change everything. The rest, as they say, is history.